Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. Thank you so much for being here. I'm your host, Rob Schott, the CHEK News World Headquarters here in Victoria. Tons of news to get to this week in BC politics. We have more tariff response, controversial and not controversial. We have all sorts of developments on the carbon tax, on involuntary care, on conservative defections. Lots to get to. I do want to start, though, with some more positive news and some fun news in the times that we are dealing with, which can be somewhat depressing. Check this out. This is Esquimalt-Colwood MLA Darlene Rochford voting remotely in the legislature with her baby in hospital 6 hours after giving birth. That is an incredible boss move. I've never seen it before. She got a standing ovation from everyone in the house, and her little one, Josephine, 7 pounds, 8 ounces, happy and healthy. History just keeps getting made in that legislature, and that was a cool thing to see. Also, normally when we talk about political staffers on this show, it's in a negative way. They have some patronage job or a big salary, but here is the opposite of that. Surrey White Rock MLA Trevor Halford with his latest constituency assistant, Madam Squeaker, the chief meow in the office of his constituency office, this kitten that he has brought on staff with this cool little letter of employment here as the inspector of shoelaces and all sorts of fun things in exchange for tummy scratches. I, as you know, endorse cats in politics. The legislature should have one, should be in every constituency office. Good on Trevor Halford. I expect him to receive the Order of BC for that move. So, with the positive fun things out of the way, let's get back to the crushing reality of American tariffs. Each and every week, it crushes us on the show and in politics. We have to talk about it because there is a new tariff bill brought by Premier David Eby into the legislature. He billed it as enabling legislation to tax trucks en route to Alaska and remove interprovincial trade borders. But holy moly, what it actually does is gives cabinet wide wartime era unchecked power to bypass the legislature for up to 2 years on economic matters. Let us begin there. That became quite a big topic of conversation late in the week. Allie, what do you think of Bill 7 as it is known?
Holy moly, indeed. Well, let's start with what the Conservative Party did in response. And so this morning, and we're recording on Friday morning, they put out a petition and an email to members and to those who subscribe about a Save Democracy petition. And, you know, it sounds ridiculously outrageous in response to this legislation, but it's completely warranted. What the NDP are trying to do here is that they're saying to British Columbians that they know best, that they will unilaterally decide what to do versus having a conversation within Victoria as we're accustomed to. Imagine that was such a luxury to have as a little bit of a debate on something before someone decides that this is just going to be law. You know, in response, I've been listening to some interviews and I heard Nikki Sharma, the Attorney General, say that we might not use it. That's a little rich. And then the other one, as I was just kind of figuring out, where does this sound so gosh darn familiar? And it was because there was an executive order by Trump, in fact, and it was ensuring accountability for all agencies. And it sounds very similar to what's happening here in that it gives Trump unilateral decision-making on certain things and overthrowing some things as well, legislation that is. And so, and you know, we talk about the tit for tat, the retaliatory tariffs. I mean, now we're just trying to embody Trump with our legislation.
I did ask David Eby that question. I said, are we not just heading to a situation where Trump is signing some executive order in the Oval Office, and then we cut to you signing some cabinet order in your office, and the entire legislative and elected branches of government have been distilled down to two people writing orders against each other? And he was like, no, but the legislation would suggest otherwise, because he will have the power to do that on almost all economic matters. Any matter to do with the economy, change a law, modify a regulation, bring in a fee, penalize someone, just massive scope without the legislature. Jillian, on the same time, in the same argument, the government is saying we need to be nimble. We got to respond to Trump in real time, and he's unpredictable and things change. So there's two sides to the argument, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think people respect that, but I think the way that they rolled this out kind of shows that they predicted that this was perhaps going to be perceived as an overreach. It was, I think, a week or two ago that we kind of had the initial announcement about the bill. And like you said, it was very much billed as doing a couple of specific things: taxing, putting tolls on trucks going to Alaska, removing interprovincial trade barriers. I think people can get behind those things. What it actually does is much more expansive. The bill is very, very vague. And I think that is troubling because we are in such an unpredictable situation. And I think the other thing that is concerning to me is the justification of anything that affects the economy is so broad. I think if it really was an emergency matter of British Columbians' health and safety, the Premier talked about the possibility of us having some of our electricity compromised because of the Columbia River Treaty talks being paused. That's scary for sure, but that's, again, a very specific thing. And that's kind of the only example he cited in his press conference. He brought it up multiple times when asked. So I think, the expansiveness and then the lack of checks and balances. There's no accountability in the legislature, very little transparency. It only needs to be reported once a year. I think that, I'd be surprised if it gets through in its current form because it is, it's such a surprise, I think.
It would have been a little better, Jeff will bring you in on this, to sort of know the problem that we are solving. Like, what is it that the current cabinet can't do, or the legislature is required to do, that we think we might need to do, that requires this overreach in a time of emergency or whatever? I didn't hear it as to Jillian's point there, but I don't know. What did you think of how it was rolled out and what it is?
Well, it's interesting to hear Allie talking about the Conservatives looking to stand up and protect democracy. What would be a bad outcome of this trade war? If we were taken over by the United States, and that's a pretty good way to lose your democracy. Look, I think this bill recognizes that we're dealing with a man-made crisis here, driven by Donald Trump's unjustified tariffs, his attacks on BC jobs and industry, his openly expressed desire to annex our country and make us the 51st state. The bill gives BC the ability to act quickly in the face of Trump action. We're talking about, well, isn't this just like Trump? That's kind of the point. You don't act like a Boy Scout in a fight with a gangster. Donald Trump can execute executive orders on a whim any day with no process, no warning, just bringing chaos. And if BC ties itself up in red tape while he throws economic punches, we're just doing his work for him. So this bill is about making sure that doesn't happen. It's going to be debated in the legislature. And the real accountability here isn't about a process. It's about whether BC did what was necessary to protect jobs, industries, and families. And if BC sat on its hands and took the hit, the same critics who are attacking the bill, who are attacking this as overreach, will be demanding to know why the government didn't act.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's overreach, though? Like, what do you think?
I don't think it's that. I think it's something that gives the government the ability during a time of economic war to respond swiftly to the kind of at a whim, chaotic volleys sent our way by Donald Trump. He's already going after the Columbia River Treaty. He's already applying tariffs to steel and aluminum being a pretty big deal for British Columbia. And if we don't have powers like this for the government to respond quickly, to not get tied up in weeks and weeks and weeks of debate in the legislature, while Trump has, in the meantime, done 10 or 12 other things to target us, we're going to get steamrolled. And that's I hear the concerns about process. I understand the need for protecting civil liberties, but there's something bigger and more threatening to BC, and that's Donald Trump and Elon Musk and what they're trying to do to make us their 51st state.
Yeah. It feels like we're racing to the bottom here to meet Trump in the mud to protect our democracy by undercutting it, for a while. But that's just me. Let's go around again on it, though, because I thought David Eby's answers on one of the questions in particular was incredible, which was essentially a question about, have you bypassed the legislature and is this concerning? And he said, listen, you know what? If the MLAs don't like this, vote against my government, bring me down. We have a slim majority. I'll take this directly to the public in an election and I'll win. And you're kind of blown back in your seat by that one because we just had an election 5 months ago and you barely won. Allie, what did you make of that answer? Because I know a lot of people have looked at it and thought, was that the prelude to the beginning of snap election talks like, Ontario just went through during a tariff time for the NDP to regain its majority during a crisis? What did you think?
Well, that's exactly it. I think that the Premier would love to go back into an election to have a little bit more of a majority. But going back to some of the things that Jeff said about, the times that we're in, if anything, this situation has taught us that people from oppositional sides would unite to make sure that we're doing the right thing. And so my question is more so, why is David Eby afraid to then take this to the appropriate way and do the vote? Take a look at the balance of how everything lays out in the legislature right now. He has the confidence of the Greens. The Conservatives, to say, would not be oppositional for the sake of being oppositional if it was for the sake of the province, including the Independents as well. And even if you lost the Independents, you'd still have the votes. And so I just don't understand what the political play here, other than it is a political play.
Mm-hmm. Jillian, what do you think of the election part of Eby's answer?
I think, it's a tell less that Eby's got, a plan to go to an election, but more that he's frustrated with how the last one turned out and the state of the majority. I think he's got to be careful. I think it smacks a little bit of entitlement and, the NDP did get a big majority during COVID, but is that, really how you want to win? Like, I think the hubris that came out of that win is kind of why they got such a reduced one the next time around. And I think, they kind of need to be careful between equating people voting in a very fearful emergency situation with like a legitimate mandate to like rule without any legislative oversight.
Yeah. Jeff, early election? Or are we just being hopeful?
No, there's not going to be an early election. We raised this time and time again leading into the last one. Isn't this a sign that there's going to be an early election? No, there's not going to be an early election. It's a response to the times that we're in, the economic war that the Americans have sent our way. Allie talks about Conservatives being constructive. They've had 3 people leave because their focus during this economic time was to mock First Nations about residential schools. We saw the day that the NDP was bringing this legislation, the big thing that the Conservatives were focused on was daylight savings time. And
to be fair, the NDP have been focused on that too. We all hate it. So
I like daylight savings time. I don't want to change the time. I like sunnier days in the summer.
No, but don't we hate the other one? Is it the other one that we hate, or which one do we hate?
Keep it this way.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, this is fierce disagreement on the panel and on the time change thing. And 5 MLAs for the Conservatives. I think 3 are not MLAs for them anymore. Voted against tariffs on countervailing tariffs on Trump. Look, I'll at risk of talking in a way that goes against what Tommy Douglas said on the War Measures Act. There was a prime minister at the time, Pierre Trudeau, who talked about weak-kneed bleeding hearts who were focused on, in this case, it would be purity of process instead of protecting BC against Donald Trump and Elon Musk. And all I can say, to quote Pierre Trudeau, is go on and bleed. The government's chief role here is to protect BC families, jobs, economy, and our sovereignty. And this is a tough bill. It's one that I would hope that we never would have to bring in, but I understand why they're bringing it in. If there's anything they would do that's different, is I would report immediately the steps that they're taking and not wait, do it twice a year. That strikes me as a bit out of touch and a bit much, but this is a bill that's for the times, and I think we need it.
Well, we'll definitely be talking more about it, because I think, to go back to one of the underlying points here, is nobody's really sure why we need, what is it that we need to do that requires, bypassing the legislature. So the Premier will get lots of questions about that. I have this feeling that Bill 7 will become the dominant kind of thing for the next couple of months in the legislative session as it goes through the amendments and process to be debated. But that's the legislature. The beauty and magnificence of the legislature, Jeff, where politicians gather to deliver eloquent speeches and speak on the people's floor to the people of our province. You have, and we're going to play these here, a couple clips of masterful examples of oration this week that we would not want to lose in our legislative session. Let's just have a look at them first.
And then we will be able to generate revenue for government to pay for the essential services that we need. Pause.
I'm also pleased to see in Budget 2025 that an addition, I'm sorry, 11? Okay, sorry, found my page. Shouldn't have tried to save paper, but just print a new copy.
Okay, beauty, so beautiful, brought a tear to my eye, those speeches, Jeff. What do you think?
First of all, nice segue from the biggest transformation of BC legislative affairs to people doing a terrible job on speeches, but they didn't
pay me the big bucks for.
Pro tip, and this is going to be in every PowerPoint deck of a BC consultant for the next 10 years, practice your speech before you give it, or else you're going to look pretty silly in the legislature when you repeat instructions in the speech to pause. Mm-hmm. I watched that video about 100 times and laughed every time. And George Chow not being able to find the page he was on. Come on, folks,
starting
practice.
To end his speech as he's beginning it because he went to the wrong pages.
Practice. It used to be in the legislature that you couldn't use notes at all, right? Yeah. You had to speak contemporaneously. And in doing that, you needed to have something actual to add to the bill. You had some subject matter, or you had prepared. I'd say let's do what do they call them? Like a pilot project. Next session, no notes that anyone can read from. Just talk from
Fortunately,
your gut.
Fortunately, we canceled the next session due to Bill 7, so there's no more sessions.
Watch what you say, Rob, because we might have to send you to jail for that.
I know Bill 7 send me straight to jail. I won't even be able to get out. That's legislation is so beautiful. Let's move on to a topic I know we just missed last week. We record on Friday mornings. We did not see the resignations and ejections of the Conservative caucus. First, Dallas Brody being removed from caucus by John Rustad, although she kind of left on her own and she wasn't welcome back. And then Jordan Keeley from Peace River North and Tara Armstrong from Kelowna removing themselves from caucus. Let's go and talk about it again. Allie, we'll start with you. Time has elapsed here. No one else has left to join them. What do we make of both the departure and the fact that they are still alone at the end of a week?
Oh my goodness. Let's start with the fact that this all happened while we were recording the show last week. So the fact that I've now had 7 days to digest this is just, it's absolute perfection. Nobody else left. And at that, they didn't necessarily create a new party, as Jordan Keeley had alluded to in some of his text messages. I think that's important in the sense of this is a very long time, hopefully before the next election, to figure out what's going to happen politically. In all of this, it's been a dance between caucus and party, in that it's your duty as an MLA in the legislature and within your community and through your constituency, and what is the re-electable political potential for these three as well. I think that there's space for these MLAs we probably won't hear a lot from, because I think that is their focus, is a lot of this political dynamic. I don't think that they're actually going to be doing a lot of that work within the legislature and within bringing forward private members' bills, things like that. On the other hand, they're completely focused on the political side, which is really going to have these deja vu repercussions that we saw with BC United as to who actually is the core of the base for the Conservative Party, and where do these 3 MLAs fit? Do they potentially go somewhere else? As we are on the eve of a potential general election, this might be reminiscent of some PPC dynamics, too, even just if this new party ends up taking a small percentage of the Conservative vote, it allows space for others to come out a victor. So there are a lot of political dynamics. We shall see where it goes. But I don't expect a whole lot from these 3 independents.
Mm-hmm. Jillian, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of unanswered questions. I think, the biggest one is, are they going to continue to play a force within the Conservative Party itself? We saw at the AGM that Rustad got his board reelected. That's really important because the board tends to have purview over, who gets nominated for the next election, these kinds of things. And like Allie alluded to, it's unlikely as independents that people get reelected. We saw that with the former BC United MLAs that ran as independents. None of them got elected, even though they were probably more well known than these folks. But they did play a role in splitting the vote on the center right and denying the Conservatives government. So I think it comes down to how much can they organize and how motivated are they to keep going on what is like a pretty hard slog when you don't have a party machine behind you. Starting a new party from scratch is really hard to do. And, the Conservatives have already just done that. And I think probably absorbed a lot of sort of the organizing power and the energy that's required to do that in that sort of political universe. They have lots of time, but I think that's a lot of time for motivation to run out. So it'll be interesting to watch and to see if there's anyone else aside from these MLAs themselves that kind of wants to keep driving this forward and kind of, trying to bring it to a head.
All right, let's just leave it there. Thank you to the panel for being here. We have some audio extras. Make sure you subscribe for that. Some spring break time that we'll be taking, but subscribe. And we'll be back as soon as we can with all the latest on BC politics here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.